Chapter 21. The Mountain, the Hound, and the Needle. Arya slipped through the chaos of the city the way she slipped through everything, not unseen but unnoticed, which was different. People in burning streets paid attention to the burning. She paid attention to the path. She had a specific destination and a specific reason for it, and the reason had been on a list she had kept in her head for years. Cersei Lannister was at the top. The city was burning and people were dying, and the woman responsible was in the Red Keep, and Arya Stark had been working toward this for a very long time. She had considered wearing a face. She had the skill for it, had worn Littlefinger's face to manage the veil, and could have worn any number of people to walk straight into the Red Keep without challenge. She had thought about it and decided against it. Cersei Lannister had spent her whole life in rooms where people performed for her, and she knew every performance. And there was another reason, simpler and more honest. She wanted Cersei to know who had come for her, not a faceless servant of the many-faced god. Arya Stark of Winterfell, who had a list and was here to finish it. But first, the mountain. She moved through back alleys and servant passages, through the parts of the Red Keep that the chaos had not yet reached, guided by the maps she had memorized years ago and the specific knowledge of how old castles worked, where the sight lines were, where guards would be positioned, where the sound would carry. She found Cersei in the throne room. Not sitting on the throne, standing near it in the center of the room with the mountain between her and the door. The mountain was in his armor, helmed, sword drawn, the absolute stillness of something that had been reduced to a single purpose. He was not looking at the door. He was looking at everything. Arya moved. She was good. She was very good. Needle was in her right hand and the cat's paw dagger in her left, and she moved from 3 separate directions in the span of 2 seconds, using every technique she had, every feint and misdirection, and strike from an unexpected angle. Needle found gaps that a larger blade couldn't have reached. The cat's paw dagger drove for joints in the armor where the metal couldn't fully protect. The mountain absorbed each one with the terrible patience of something that had no pain to worry about and no fatigue. He caught her on the 4th pass, not her blade but her arm, and the grip of the mountain was simply mechanical, a machine that had closed around something it had decided to hold. She could not get free. She fought with everything, with Needle, with the cat's paw dagger, with every technique that had saved her from things that should have been impossible. He took it and held on, and the grinding pressure of the grip was doing what it was going to do, and she thought, this is the one I couldn't plan for. The door opened. 2 men came through it at almost the same moment, from different directions, through the main door and through the servants' entrance. Both of them stopped for a half-second when they took in the scene. Jaime Lannister and Sandor Clegane. The Hound moved first. He moved the way the Hound always moved when he had made his decision, not quickly, not with any particular elegance, but with the specific directness of a man who has stopped caring about what happens to him and is focusing entirely on what happens to the target. He hit the mountain from the side with the full weight of a very large man going very fast, and the mountain let go of Arya in the moment of impact, which was all she needed. She dropped. She rolled. She was on her feet in the space behind the mountain before he had completed the motion of turning. Needle in her right hand, cat's paw dagger in her left, both of them ready. Qyburn was retreating. He had been standing near the rear of the throne room, not attending Cersei, but watching the scene with the detached attention of a man who has seen enough unusual things that his threshold for surprise has become very high. He watched Sandor Clegane enter. He watched Jaime Lannister enter behind him. He watched the mountain release the girl. He made his calculations. He reached into his robe and produced a small vial, sealed with wax, a cord wick pushed through the stopper. The glass was pale green. He lit the wick from one of the wall torches with the careful deliberateness of someone who has done this before in controlled conditions, and is now doing it in uncontrolled ones. Then he threw the vial against the stone floors, blocking the passage with the godless fire. The vial shattered. Wildfire spread across a section of the floor in a wash of cold green fire, eating into the old stone, and the room filled with the acrid smell of it and a bloom of heat that pushed everyone backward a step. The fire did not consume the room. A single vial was not enough for that, and the stone was old and damp. But it burned with the completeness of wildfire, consuming everything within its reach and painting the walls green in flickering reflection. Qyburn was not found. The rear passages of the Red Keep were old and numerous, and a man who had spent years serving in that castle and attending to its secrets would have known which ones led out. Arya wanted to help the Hound, but the fight that followed was the most brutal thing she had ever witnessed, and she had witnessed considerable brutality. The Hound and the mountain were brothers in the way of 2 people who had been shaped by the same violence, who understood each other's rhythms, who knew every trick the other had, who had spent their whole lives in the same shadow. The mountain was not precisely alive, and the Hound had always known it would come to this. He had been carrying this particular reckoning for as long as Arya had known him. The Hound hit the mountain with everything he had, not elegantly, not strategically, with the total commitment of a man who has been saving this for a very long time and has finally arrived. The impact rocked the mountain back a step, which was more than most things could manage. The mountain recovered and struck back with the force of something that was no longer limited by pain or fatigue or the ordinary rules of how much damage a body could absorb. The Hound took the blow and kept moving. "Come on then, you cunt," he said, in the flat conversational tone of a man who has nothing left to lose and finds that freeing. He drove the mountain back again. He drove him back again. He took wounds that would have ended most people. The mountain's armored fists landing with a sound like struck iron, and kept driving, kept pressing, refusing to go down, his whole body an act of refusal. Wildfire burning, Jaime looked at his sister. He had been looking at her for 40 years. He had looked at her across tournament fields and council tables and beds, and the terrible spaces between people who have run out of ways to reach each other. He had looked at her through love and anger and grief, and the exhaustion of someone who has spent his whole life trying to understand a thing that does not want to be understood. She looked at him now. The throne room was burning at its edges, the drapes, the tapestries, and she looked at him with those green Lannister eyes, and in them, past the composure and the calculation, he could see the thing she had always shown him and no one else, the genuine fear, not of dying, the fear of being wrong, the fundamental terror of a woman who had been told from birth that the world would not give her what she wanted and had decided the solution was to take it before anyone could refuse her. "Jaime," she said. "Cersei. You came back." "I always came back," he said. "This time I wish you hadn't," she said. She said it without accusation. She was looking at Widow's wail in his hand, and she was reading his face the way only she could read it, and she understood what was about to happen. Something in her face shifted grief and pride and the loneliness of someone who has been alone even in company for their entire life. She looked at him and she said, "Was any of it worth it? Everything we did?" He thought about it honestly, because she deserved his honesty now if she had never had it before. "Some of it," he said. "The children were worth it, the love was worth it." He paused. "The rest of it." "I know," she said. "Cersei." "I know, Jaime." She closed her eyes. When she opened them they were very clear. "Do it then, do what you came to do." A pause. He crossed the room. He thought about the Mad King, whose throat he had cut, whose city he had saved, whose wildfire had not burned the population below. He thought about the choice he had made at 17 years old and had carried for more than 2 decades without anyone believing it was the right one. He thought, some choices do not become the right ones by being understood. They are simply the right ones and you make them, and you carry them. The melting stone from uncontained wildfire fell around them, and the mountain stumbled into the flames and the Hound went with him, punching, pushing, grabbing, pulling, biting, head-butting, taking them both down into the growing green flames. It was not a victory. It was the only ending available, and the Hound had understood that since before he came into this room. Arya stood in the burning room and breathed. Sandor Clegane had been on her list since she was 12 years old. She had put him there the day he killed Micah, the butcher's boy, her friend, the boy who had done nothing except spar with Arya Stark and had paid for it with his life. She had carried that name for 8 years the way she carried all the names, with the flat patience of someone who intends to settle accounts. She stood in the burning throne room and looked at what was left of the place where the mountain and the Hound had ended, and she thought about all of it at once. The boy in the road, and the man who had done it, and the same man who had stood between her and the gold cloaks the night her father was taken, not out of kindness, not from principle, just from the complicated arithmetic of someone who had his own reasons for keeping her breathing. The man who had carried her across half the Riverlands and put her down at the gates of the Eyrie and walked away. The man who had stood and killed dead things without complaint. The man who had just died for her in a burning room. She was not going to cross his name off the list. The list had never been about who deserved to die. The list had been about what she had decided to carry and what she would set down and when. She set it down. It did not feel the way she had thought it would. She had thought there would be more to it. But grief, she had learned, rarely looked like what you expected. And sometimes the only thing you felt at the end of a long account was the absence of the weight you had been carrying. She breathed, she straightened. Then she looked at Cersei. And at Jaime, who was standing between Arya and Cersei with Widow's wail in his left hand, and an expression she had never seen on a Lannister before. The expression of a man who has spent his whole life running from something and has stopped running. Arya said nothing. She looked at him. She looked at the sword in his hand and she looked at his face and she read both of them with the full weight of the training she had spent years acquiring. She understood what she was seeing. She understood what he was here to do and what it would cost him and whether it was the right thing. She stepped back, not away, not out of the room. She stayed. She was the witness, but she stepped back and she let him have the space and she waited to see what Jaime Lannister would do. Widow's wail was Valyrian steel. It was quick. James stood alone in the burning room with the woman he had loved his whole life. He had been called the Kingslayer since he was 17, the boy who killed the king he had sworn to protect, the act that had defined everything people thought they knew about him. He had carried that name for decades, sometimes as armor and sometimes as a wound, and he had never fully explained it to anyone who mattered and had eventually stopped trying. The Queenslayer, the man who had killed his own sister, the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, in the burning throne room of the Red Keep. He had done both things for the same reason, because the alternative was worse for everyone who wasn't him, Cersei most of all. Arya stood in the burning doorway and watched. She felt the absence of completion she had expected to feel, had expected Cersei's death to close something, to settle the weight on the list. It didn't feel the way she'd thought it would. It felt like the end of a thing rather than the ending of anything. She thought maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what justice actually is. She walked out of the throne room and left Jaime with his sister, and she did not look back. The city was not lost. The city was damaged and burning and full of people who needed help, hundreds of them dead and hundreds more injured and thousands more in the paths of fires that were still spreading. But it was not lost, and the battle which had been a battle became something else in the hour after the bells, a rescue. Jon moved through the streets, pulling people from rubble, directing survivors toward the gates, doing the work that was in front of him. He thought about his father. He thought about Ned Stark, who had taught him that the man who passed the sentence should swing the sword, who had taught him that power meant responsibility rather than permission. He thought this is what it means, not the battle, this.